900 years ago, there was a big Native American city sitting right along the Mississippi River. It had 15,000 people living in the city itself and another 30,000 in little villages north and south along the Mississippi. It had a huge pyramid at its center that we call Monk's Mound. And this was really big. It was 100 feet tall. It covered an area of 15 acres. And in terms of volume, not in height, it is the third biggest ever built in the Americas by any of the pre-Columbian civilizations. The only ones that are bigger are the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan and the Pyramid of Cholula. So Monk's Mound is the third biggest thing that pre-Columbian Native American civilizations ever built. Now, the city had hundreds and hundreds of buildings, and it was surrounded by a 2-mile-long palisade wall. This civilization, this area, this city, and its surrounds was so big that there wouldn't be a settlement that size until the 1700s. That's when New York and Boston and Philadelphia started rising in size, but they didn't get past the size of this city until hundreds of years later, after the city had long been forgotten. We'll never know its real name, but we call it Cahokia, and it was built by the Mississippian civilization. Cahokia still exists, at least in part. It's a national park now, and it's right across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, though a lot of people in St. Louis don't even know it exists. There are so many amazing things about Cahokia. I visited there twice, and I'm looking forward to going back. Right now, they're rebuilding their amazing museum and visitor center, and I'm waiting until they get that together so I can see the new artifacts on display. It's going to be great. In this video, I'm going to tell you about how Cahokia formed, how it rose to power, its demise, and its effect on the Mississippian world going forward. Cahokia as a community begins in the 700 CE. At that time, it's just a few hundred people, and it's a fairly typical what we call Woodlands culture village. Hopewell civilization had just fallen apart around 500 CE. Now, it lasted for centuries, and it built huge geoglyphs, and it built pyramids. We talk about a Hopewell sphere of interaction. Its heartland was what's now Ohio, but its influence spread all the way down to the Gulf and all the way over to the East Coast. There are all sorts of Hopewell-related sites that are thriving until 500, and then things start to fall apart. Part of the reason they fell apart is because two huge technologies entered the area. One of them was the bow and arrow, which strangely came from Canada down, but that changed hunting. The other one was corn, which no doubt came from Mesoamerica, but that changed subsistence strategies, and they were able to grow huge areas of crops for the first time. Cahokia, at the beginning, was just one of these little woodland villages getting back in the groove after the fall of Hopewell civilization, and they were beginning to farm along the Mississippi. As Cahokia was just this little community, there was a much larger community growing to the south of them. It's now in Arkansas. We used to call it the Toltec Mounds, but just recently they renamed it to the more appropriate Plum Bayou Mounds. Toltec was a long-standing misunderstanding that if there was a pyramid in Arkansas, it must have been Mexican civilization, so they called it Toltec Mounds. Now we call it Plum Bayou. But they're very, very interesting, and they are part of Cahokia's story. While Cahokia is this little village, Plum Bayou people are building pyramids and pyramid mounds. They're also putting houses around the community. There's a berm around it, but not quite a wall. So these sorts of pyramids that are not uncommon, actually, the Americas at this point have been building pyramid mounds for 2,000 years. But these are interesting in that they have houses on top of them, probably for elite folks. And there's evidence in Plum Bayou of repeated episodes of major feasting. The whole community invited into the city center to feast. We know they did that because there are mounds that inside of them are all the trash from those festivals. There's tons of bones and refuse of corn, and so we know that they are having these big feasting things happening there. We also see a lot of serving dishes. They have very nice pottery, It's very distinct as well. We know what Plum Bayou pottery is. But around 1000 CE, that city depopulates. People migrate away from it. And at the same time, we see Cahokia growing right around 1000. It turns from a couple hundred people to over 1000 people. And we know those are migrants coming from all over the place. But some of them are definitely from Plum Bayou because they bring that same ceramic type with them to Cahokia, and it appears they're new around 1000. So by 1000 CE, Cahokia has about 1000 people. But by 1060, it has over 10,000 people. Something major happens in that 50-60 year period. And there is an interesting clue, a kind of a violent macabre clue, from a mound that's right in the middle of where Cahokia's city center would be. It's still not there yet, but this mound has evidence that may point to how the city transformed itself. The mound is called Mound 72, and it has 260 burials in it. A lot of them were sacrifices. Now, a little caveat here that Mound 72, in its original form, was what the French pioneers called an earthen barn. It was long and kind of shaped like a barn. It came up to a ridge on the top. And I know that there were at least 9 more of these earthen barns at Cahokia, maybe as many as 16. Unfortunately, Mound 72 was the only one that was properly dug. The bodies in Mound 72 were in layers and sometimes next to each other, and the big barn covered the whole area. The lowest part of the burials are 4 individuals that are buried with nice things. There's a couple that's a man and a woman, and they're covered with 20,000 shell beads. They're not laying side by side. The woman's kind of laying over the man, not in a sexual way, but just kind of slumped over him. So that's an interesting element of this burial. But with all the artifacts, they're definitely honored individuals, perhaps some of the first of Cahokia's dynasty to be. The other 2 nice individuals there are both men, and they have tons of artifacts around them. There are hundreds of these beautifully made arrowheads, and they're grouped in forms of color. So it's this kind of colorful, beautiful display. There's also copper in there. There's chunky discs. There's lots of things in these initial burials. But then right next to it is a mound that had 24 young women in it, and they're all obviously strangled. They were sacrificed, probably in association with those elite burials. Then on top of those women were 4 young men's bodies, and their arms were locked kind of elbow to elbow, but they didn't have heads or hands. So this is a very strange and violent thing that happened before the city of Cahokia. But it didn't stop there. Another pit was dug right next to the one with the strangled women. This one had 53 strangled women. And this one, interestingly, there were 52 of them that were obviously young, probably in their teen years. But there was one who was in her late 30s. So perhaps she was the matron of this group. But all of them were strangled and put in this pit. Now, it gets even worse. Next to that, they dig an open pit. This one doesn't go into a mound. It's a pit. And they push people into it. There are 39 bodies, and they were clearly murdered there. Some of them have their head smashed in. Some of them have their head chopped off. Some of them just have arrows sticking into them. But it's clear that they went into this pit still alive, because the formation of the body shows them climbing over each other. There are even some reaching up through the sand, trying to get out of the pit. Very, very macabre. And on top of that group of 39 murders were another 12 people buried with honor. They were on little platforms and they had artifacts with them. So they were buried on top of that sacrificial pit, next to another sacrificial pit, next to another sacrificial pit. This was absolutely unprecedented in North America. In point of fact, things like these mass burials and sacrifices aren't even found in Mesoamerica. The only places that I know that have big groups of especially female sacrifices are down on the coast of Peru. The Moche and the Chimu did that, and they are a little before and contemporary with Cahokia. I'm not saying that Cahokia was visited by people from South America. I'm just saying that's a weird coincidence. Now, all of those burials and those sacrifices were then covered with this big, dark earth, what the French called earth barn. And that was the mound that sat there. All of that was in place by 1030 CE. And then at 1050 CE, the city totally transforms. We see the people of Cahokia disassemble all of the houses that they were living in, and they rebuild the houses, but this time they're all very uniform. They're rectangular, and they have these grass roofs, and they're all about the same size. So there's a kind of new housing that goes in. This is also when Monk's Mound starts. The first level of Monk's Mound starts here, and they start a big open plaza. There are neighborhoods around the plaza. They have all those rectangular houses, and they also have smaller mounds. There's usually 2 in each neighborhood. One is probably the residence of the clan leader. The other one is their mortuary mound. So there are these clans that are building neighborhoods around a central plaza. And in the central plaza, just off center, is a big sport court. There's a game they played called Chunky that involves a stone disc, and they throw spears at it trying to stop it. That's Chunky. And Cahokia seems to be one of the first places we ever see this game. But they trade out their chunky discs and other things to other Mississippian sites that are growing at the same time. So there are these little sites that are growing, and they're trading with Cahokia. Everything seems to be going fine. They got through that violent sacrifice time, and now the city is growing in fame and fortune. By now we're at, let's say, 1100, and there are definitely other growing Mississippian cities. We've got Aslan to the north, we've got Spiro in Oklahoma, we've got Moundville in Alabama, we've got Etowah in Georgia. It's a wide sphere of influence, and they are definitely trading with Cahokia. Not only do we see those chunky discs, but we also see ceramics that have iconography on them. They're trading back and forth as well. So this is a whole sphere of influence, and at the heart of it is this city, Cahokia. It's sometime just after 1100 that Monk's Mound reaches its greatest height. At that point, it covers 15 acres, it's got 4 terraces, and there's a whole huge area on top that holds a complex of buildings. Perhaps some of them were for priests, but almost certainly the ruler of Cahokia lived up on top of this mound, and he surveyed his community around. Corn was running through the roof. They were planting everywhere, and the city's size, the population, swells to its maximum of 15,000. Some people say 20,000, but it was a huge area. Originally, it covered 3,000 acres. Nowadays, the park is less than 500 acres. So the city is only a fraction of what it was today. But then around 1130, something happens at Cahokia, and it's not good. They build a giant wall around the entire center part of the city. It's 2 miles worth of a loop, and it's made of some 20,000 big tree trunks. Each of the posts in this palisade wall are an individual trunk that's 10 to 12 feet tall, and they mount it into the ground. So something happened that they want to defend the city from. Now, not only did they build that, but they actually rebuilt it 3 different times in the next 20 years, up till 1150, when the city seems to be evacuated. No more buildings are built and no more refurbishments of their big wall. They let that just dilapidate. First, the outer villages, the places that were supporting the city, they clear out. Those are all abandoned. Then by 1200, the city itself is pretty much all abandoned. By 1250, it's nothing but squatters and things are overgrown. Something happened there, but we don't know what it is. We don't have any evidence of an attack. We don't have skeletal evidence of people suddenly being more frequently wounded. We're really not sure why Cahokia collapsed, but it did. So where did all those people go? Well, we suspect that they filtered out to the other growing Mississippian cities, like out in Alabama and Oklahoma. Those cities rose in population as Cahokia fell. Despite its spectacular collapse, we still consider Cahokia to be the primordial city of Mississippian civilization. Before them, we had people like Plum Bayou, not doing the same sort of thing. But going forward, all of the new Mississippian cities that would go on all the way to European contact share a lot of the elements that they learned from Cahokia. They all have those big pyramid mounds with royal residences up on top. They all continue to build those giant palisade walls to protect themselves, assumably from each other, because they were all kind of warring city-states with alliances and enemies. That's something we know even from contact period. DeSoto exploited that relationship all the time. He'd get one city that didn't like another city to fight each other, and he'd come in and pick up the pieces. Now, they also had the same kind of ceramics. The ceramics and the art that they created was all originated, arguably you could say that it started in Hopewell or Adena times, but the package of iconography was really started at Cahokia and then dispersed outwards. We call that package of iconography and art symbols the SECC, the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. All the very same kind of iconography all over those cities, identifying them as a single civilization practicing a single religion. The one thing that didn't go forward was that weird moment of sacrifice. I know a lot of the other cities. I've traveled to them. I've looked in their collections. I don't see another example of that kind of sacrifice that was the catalyst for Cahokia. So, even though we'll never really know all the specifics of how Mississippian civilization evolved, I say that the cities that came up after Cahokia saw a lot of good, a lot of nice life ways that they could participate in, but they decided that that whole crazy sacrifice thing was a wrong turn, and they really toned that down. If you like what I do, please consider supporting me through Patreon. YouTube's ad revenue model sucks. You have to put up with clicking through weird commercials, and creators always get a pittance of the actual revenue. So let's not do that. Patreon is really a much more direct way to support the kind of content that you value. For just $5 a month, you can keep me in this chair instead of out there trying to make a living some other way. I am as cheap as a cup of coffee and considerably less bitter. My Patreon is actually linked to my podcast, Archaeologist, which if you haven't heard that, you might like that too. But here's the link right here to my Patreon through Archaeologist. I'll also put it in my show notes. Thanks for watching. If you like that, you might like these other two videos. Give them a try.